Sandra Bullock's story begins not on a movie set, but in a quiet echo, a promise, and a warning. Because brilliance, as her life would prove, always invites storms. Audiences first felt that fierce energy when she played Annie Porter, a young woman clinging to survival on a runaway bus in a speed. Then later, they saw the warmth and courage of Leigh Anne Tuohy in The Blind Side, a woman who opened her home and heart to a boy the world had forgotten. But behind those roles stood someone far more complex. A daughter, a mother, a producer, and a survivor who kept moving when betrayal, fear, and loss tried to paralyze her. That radiant smile that once lit up red carpets, it was never just decoration. It was armor, forged in private, burnished through decades of silent battles. For over 30 years, Sandra has lived between triumph and tragedy, transforming heartbreak into art, pain into compassion, and wounds into wisdom. At 61, her life forms a circle. The newest storm is still raging, and the earliest ache is still echoing. To understand Sandra Bullock, you have to connect both ends of that circle, the light and the shadow. Start with resilience, then trace the cost. Every scene is linked from a childhood spent in motion to starving days in New York, the explosion of speed, the bittersweet glow of an Oscar, and the quiet horror of a stalker's footsteps in the night. Every chapter carries a price. Every victory hides a scar. Because in Sandra's world, strength was never granted. It was earned. July 26, 1964, Arlington, Virginia. Sandra Annette Bullock enters a world already tuned to music. Her mother, Helga Meyer, is a celebrated German opera singer. Her father, John Bullock, an American vocal coach and soldier. Her earliest memories are not of playgrounds or picnics, but of backstage corridors and echoing rehearsal halls across Europe. By the time she could read, she could already recognize the weight of silence before a curtain rose. Childhood for Sandra was measured not in years, but in moves, city to city, stage to stage. She watched her mother command concert halls in Vienna and Salzburg, her voice soaring above orchestras while Sandra waited in the wings, learning that poise and precision were the only ways to survive under the spotlight. By the age of 5, she was singing Mozart with children's choirs, learning to sit still while other kids ran wild outside. The discipline of art became her lullaby, and the structure became her comfort. But that nomadic rhythm had a cost. By 10, she had lived in more German and Austrian cities than most adults could name. Each relocation tore her from friends, schools, and any sense of home. In 1976, when the family finally returned to the United States, she expected relief. Instead, she found another kind of exile. Her classmates mocked her clothes, handmade, European, different. Her accent turned every sentence into an invitation for ridicule. The laughter in the hallways wasn't with her, it was at her. It was there, in that isolation, that Sandra began to observe, really observe, the forgotten ones, the kids sitting alone, the quiet ones no one noticed. German remained her comfort. English became her armor. Two worlds, two selves, both pulling in opposite directions. That tension would shape everything that followed, because from those lonely years came her empathy, her flexibility, her authenticity, that rare spark Hollywood can never fabricate, only recognize when it burns on screen. She didn't grow up poor, but she grew up disciplined, trained in the art of perfection, not indulgence. And when the time came to choose, she didn't choose comfort. She chose the hard road. In 1986, Sandra Bullock made the decision that would define her life. She left East Carolina University just a few credits shy of graduation, a degree within reach, and traded it for uncertainty. Her destination? New York City. Her reason? To chase a dream that had already broken thousands before her. The city greeted her not with applause, but indifference. There was no famous last name to open doors, no family connections to soften the fall. Just a young woman with a suitcase, a stubborn streak, and a belief that grit could be its own kind of luck. By day, she attended acting classes and auditions that vanished into silence before she even made it home. By night, she bartended, waited tables, and checked coats, the rhythm of survival replacing the rhythm of music from her childhood. The winters bit through her thin gloves. Her feet blistered in cheap shoes. Instant noodles and bitter coffee became dinner more nights than not. Family could have helped, but pride wouldn't allow it. She wanted to earn her place. Years later, she would say softly, "The no's taught me more than the yeses." Those words were not philosophy. They were lived truth. The late 1980s brought small roles in films that disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. Posters faded, reels gathered dust, and critics barely noticed she existed. But she carried every failure like a secret talisman, a scar that reminded her she was still in the fight. Most would have gone home. She didn't. Every rejection became another rehearsal for resilience. Every no hardened her focus. Every disappointment taught her patience. Endure, refine, return, endure again. That was her mantra, the quiet loop that played through her mind long before fame ever did. And then, finally, after years of silence, momentum began to stir. In 1993, she landed a supporting role in Demolition Man, opposite Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes. It wasn't a breakout, but for the first time, her name appeared on a poster that people actually saw. The next year, fate delivered her a seat on a bus that would never stop. Speed wasn't written for her. Bigger names had already circled the part. But when she walked into that audition with nothing but a folding chair and a paper plate to stand in for a steering wheel, something electric happened. She played it raw, open, real. Keanu Reeves met her energy perfectly. When the room felt it, the studio couldn't look away. And when Speed hit theaters in 1994, it exploded. A runaway success that pulled in hundreds of millions on a modest budget. The woman who had once wiped tables and rationed ramen was suddenly Hollywood's newest lead. Overnight, Sandra Bullock became a household name. But beneath the overnight headlines lay a decade of struggle that no one had seen. She didn't bask in the fame, she built on it. In 1995, she pivoted seamlessly from adrenaline to charm, starring in While You Were Sleeping, where her warmth and timing made the world fall in love all over again. The transition from anonymous actress to America's sweetheart seemed effortless, but it wasn't. It was discipline. Years of saying yes only when she was truly ready. From that moment on, her rise looked like a perfect climb. A Time to Kill, Hope Floats, Miss Congeniality, 2 weeks' notice, each one stamped with her unique balance of humor, honesty, and heart. But Sandra was never just content to be the face on the poster. She wanted control, direction. So she founded 40s Films, her own production company, to guide her creative choices and ensure she'd never ride a shotgun in her own career again. Success, however, has a cruel rhythm. The higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes. She returned for Speed 2. Cruise control, hoping to recapture lightning in a bottle. But this time, The storm fizzled. Critics circled. Fans mocked. She later joked that only 5 people liked the movie, but the sting was real, that failure might have broken others. For Sandra, it only refined her, because she understood that a stumble didn't erase the climb. Years later, redemption arrived in the form of a story built on love and courage, The Blind Side. Her portrayal of Lee Ann Tuohy, the fierce yet compassionate mother who opened her heart to a lost boy, won her an Academy Award in 2010. The triumph was deserved, the kind that should have stood untouched, a perfect moment of grace, but life rarely honors symmetry. Just days after the Oscars, her world collapsed. Headlines turned from celebration to betrayal as her marriage to Jesse James imploded under the weight of infidelity rumors. The same cameras that once captured her smile now hunted her grief. Sandra responded not with rage, but with silence. No spectacle, no interviews, just quiet dignity. She signed papers with one hand and rocked her adopted baby son, Louis, to a sleep with the other. The golden statue honored her craft, but her composure, that calm strength amid devastation, honored something far greater, her character. Once again, she had proven what her entire life had been teaching her, that storms don't end you. They reveal what you're made of. After The Blind Side, Sandra's public triumph gave way to private turbulence. The tabloids may have moved on, but the silence she chose was deliberate, a way to rebuild without the noise. She focused on what mattered, her son, her sanity, her peace, and quietly she began to work again, not for fame, but for balance. When Gravity arrived in 2013, it wasn't just a movie, it was a metaphor. Alone in the void, fighting to survive, it was Sandra Bullock's story told through a spacesuit. The film soared past $700 million at the box office, earning her another Oscar nomination and one of the richest paydays in Hollywood history. But the real triumph wasn't financial. It was emotional, proof that a woman once mocked for her accent, who once scrubbed tables for rent, could now carry an entire universe on her shoulders. Then came Bird Box, a streaming phenomenon that had millions around the world watching her lead 2 children through a blind apocalypse. And The Unforgivable, a haunting study of guilt and redemption. Even in The Lost City, decades into her career, she proved she could still open theaters, still draw laughter, still move hearts. Behind all of it was a thread of resilience, the quiet pulse that had carried her since childhood. To the world, she was unbreakable, but the storms have a way of finding those who survive them too well. In June 2014, Sandra returned home late to her Los Angeles house. The night was still, too still. A sound shattered the quiet, then another. She locked herself in the closet, whispered a 911 call, her voice trembling but calm. An intruder had broken in, a stalker who had watched her, followed her, left letters, crossed every line. He carried a notebook filled with her photos and delusions. He owned guns, though none that night. Still, the weapon that night was fear, sharp, invisible, unforgettable. Afterward, ordinary rooms no longer felt safe. She unraveled, she later admitted, terrified her son might absorb her anxiety through proximity. So she sought help, EMDR therapy. Healing that came in the slow inches, not grand gestures. It was proof once more. Survival isn't a single act, it's a discipline. Years passed, the nightmares eased, and into that fragile calm walked someone unexpected. Photographer Brian Randall. He arrived to shoot her son's birthday. He stayed because he saw her, not the fame. Work became conversation. Conversation became connection. connection became love. In 2015, Sandra adopted a second child, a brave little girl named Lila. Brian, already a father himself, brought warmth, patience, and stability. He became more than a partner. He became family. Their home was filled not with glamour, but with laughter. Pancake mornings, school runs, quiet evenings. For a woman who had known both adoration and betrayal, this simple ordinariness felt like the rarest luxury of all. But life, as always, had another test waiting. In 2020, life dealt Sandra its cruelest blow yet. Brian Randall, the man who had restored her faith in peace, was diagnosed with ALS, the disease that slowly steals the body while leaving the spirit painfully awake. Together, they made a quiet pact. No public statements, no sympathy headlines. They wanted their children to live under love, not under a countdown. Sandra stepped back from Hollywood entirely. Her mansion turned into a sanctuary, not of luxury but of care. Machines hummed softly through the sleepless nights. Nurses blended into the rhythm of family. There was a spoon feeding, soft laughter, whispered gratitude. She became his caregiver, his anchor, his steady light. Music filled the rooms, their favorite songs looping between laughter and tears. Birthdays were still celebrated, not to mark decline, but to remind the children that love outlasts everything. Louis would tell a joke and Brian would still smile. Layla would tuck her drawings into his hand and he'd whisper, "Thank you." Moments like those became their gold dust, precious, fleeting, unforgettable. On August 5th, 2023, after 3 years of decline, Brian passed away peacefully at 57. There were no cameras, no reporters, only silence, broken by the sound of children holding their mother's hands. 9 days later, before grief could even breathe, another storm erupted. The film that had earned her an Oscar, The Blind Side, suddenly became the center of controversy. Michael O'Hare, whose life had inspired the story, filed a lawsuit against the Tuohy family alleging exploitation. Sandra had no involvement, no connection, yet her name was dragged into the chaos. Strangers online demanded she return her Academy Award, as if she'd written the script herself. It was cruelty disguised as commentary. A woman mourning her partner was now being accused by a world too impatient to seek the truth. But Sandra didn't lash out. She didn't speak. She simply retreated into silence, the same shield that had protected her so many times before. Love lost, integrity questioned, silence chosen. Her restraint became its own a statement, proof that dignity speaks louder than any defense, because fame magnifies pain, but grace, her kind of grace, disarms it. And so she endured again, not by fighting the noise, but by outlasting it, until it forgot itself. When the headlines finally faded, she returned to what mattered: her children, her home, her peace. Today, Sandra Bullock lives far from the glare that once defined her. The cameras that used to chase her every step now only capture her when she allows them to, on her own terms. She divides her time between her homes, a peaceful retreat in Malibu facing the ocean, a secluded Beverly Hills sanctuary wrapped in trees, and a quiet island home in Georgia, where the waves seem to whisper calm into her children's hearts. Each home marks a chapter, not of luxury, but of survival and serenity. Her wealth, hundreds of millions by estimation, stands as tangible proof of her success. But ask her what matters, and she'll tell you it's not the awards, nor the fame, nor the fortune. It's mornings filled with pancakes and laughter. It's evening car rides to school events. is the sight of Louis and Layla growing up safe, loved, and unburdened by the storms she had to weather. Professionally, she has stepped away after The Lost City, calling it a pause, not an ending. Hollywood labels it retirement. She calls it reprioritizing, because for her, true success was never about staying on screen. It was about knowing when to step away. She continues producing through her company, Fortis Films, but her real production now is peace, hours reclaimed, wounds given space to heal, and a home where love breathes freely again. Even in absence, her influence remains. You can still feel her presence, like residual light from a star that refuses to fade. The industry she once conquered now looks to her as an example of what longevity truly means. Not endless visibility, but the wisdom to pause. Her days now begin quietly. Pilates at dawn, long bike rides, moments of dancing in her kitchen when no one's watching. The beauty that once dazzled Hollywood hasn't disappeared. It has evolved, softened by experience, deepened by endurance. When she appears in public, it's not the star people see first, but the calm, a serenity that seems to glow because of what it has endured. The loss of Brian remains a private wound, one she honors through photos tucked away, stories told to the children, and laughter shared over memories that still sparkle. Louis and Layla remember him not for the illness, but for his warmth, his jokes, his gentle steadiness, exactly as she wanted. Sandra carries grief not as a burden, but as a compass, guiding her toward gratitude. To the outside world, she is a Hollywood legend. To those close to her, she is proof that a dignity can coexist with devastation. Her legacy isn't just the films, the awards, or the fame. It's the art of surviving gracefully. Every sunrise Sandra Bullock greets now is quieter than the ones before. No premieres, no red carpets, no endless interviews, just the hum of coffee brewing, the sound of her children's laughter, and the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt from storms. She has learned something rare, that the art of living after loss is not about erasing pain, but learning to live with it. The storms never truly stop, but they change. They become softer, more reflective, like waves returning gently to shore. Her journey from a lonely child singing Mozart in Europe to one of Hollywood's most beloved stars traces a perfect circle of endurance. Every chapter adds weight, not wear. The abandoned auditions, the heartbreaks, the betrayals, the triumphs, they all belong to the same story. A story not of fame, but of resilience. At 61, Sandra stands not as a symbol of celebrity, but of survival. Her flame no longer blinds, it guides. The Oscar gleams on a shelf, but her truer reward sits across the breakfast table. Two children growing up under the shelter of love she fought to preserve. In their laughter, Brian's memory lives on. In their peace, her purpose is fulfilled. Hollywood measures success by a spotlight. Sandra measures it by silence, because she has finally mastered the rarest skill of all, to stand inside the storm and remain unshaken. Her story reminds us that the strength can be quiet, compassion can be fierce, and authenticity, the kind that never needs an audience, always outlasts fame. Sandra Bullock's life began in motion, running buses, racing hearts, chasing dreams, but now it ends in stillness, the calm earned only by those who have survived everything and yet remain kind. For an industry obsessed with reinvention, she offers something far rarer, the courage to step away while still burning bright. Sandra Bullock is more than an actress. She is living proof that dignity can outlive devastation, that love remains even when tested, and that surviving with grace, quietly, steadfastly, is its own kind of art.